Next up, we have Mr. Nickerson. Since we've had this consistent issue, I've now unmuted Chris, and I think Deviant's still on as well. So that's awesome.
Yeah, are we? Am I participating in the next little mini panel thing?
I have no problem with it. Chris, you cool with it?
Awesome.
Cool. I'm going to remind.
Are you going to do something with my webcam, or what am I? Oh wait, if I do this, does this do something?
Yeah,
how about that?
There we go. Hey, party line.
So, I'm going to remind both of you that we are in a public library, and so far I'm pretty sure that we're going to have children that are have learned new words and how to break into doors. So that's just awesome. So keep that in mind. They're actually picking up stickers like our red team pen testing stickers, and we're putting them on stuff. And I'm like, this is awesome. So no, the library has been fantastic hosting us here in Adel. Hey,
I promise to stop swearing and doing adult things.
I solemnly swear that I'm up to no good. But no, I don't know if you guys saw, but the sheriff actually showed up today. That was kind of a cool surprise. Nice. He showed up in the middle of Kennedy's presentation and talked about it, and so that was kind of cool. But Chris, the big reason why I wanted you to come on, and everybody, just so you know, whenever you're looking at computer security and where we're at, I mentioned InGuardians was very much there at the beginning. And Chris, I believe that you were doing this independently before InGuardians even existed as well. Is that a correct assumption?
Yeah, since the mid '90s.
Yeah. Is that whenever you were running like the ISP in your house, and you told the story of all the modems that were like sucking all the power out and fires were starting about that same time frame?
That was a little earlier. I was doing it professionally for my kind of offense team at Sprint.
Yep, very cool. So whenever you're looking, like I said, in this industry, I wanted to bring in a lot of the people that helped shape us to where we are. And Chris and Deviant are absolutely in that exact same category. The definition of what a physical pen test is, the definition of even what a pen test is, many times goes back to what these two gentlemen have talked about for years. I remember one of the first presentations I saw in the community was one of Nickerson's presentations. I can't even remember where it was. It was online somewhere. And he was one of the first people to sound the alarm of showing up and running a NenMap and a NESA scan and printing a report. That's garbage. And it was like this intense sort of conscience in the industry, and I've been following him ever since, and got to meet him at ShmooCon a number of years ago. He poured me a big glass of scotch at a ShmooCon panel that went horribly off the rails. But it's important to have these people involved, because many times we don't know where things came from. And in a lot of ways, this industry has sprung from the head of people like Nickerson, like Deviant, like the people from InGuardians. So Nickerson, one of the things that I wanted to ask you—
talk about emotional work, Chris Nickerson and— sorry. I was going to talk about the unpaid emotional work, right? Nickerson and Dave and others who did the pen test execution standard. There was no standard by which a test would be considered valid before a bunch of people unpaid just did all that work. And you released it all for free, right? It's all online still.
Yep, it is. And that reminds me, Chris, we've got to go and update. We've got a lot of work to do on that, but free time, right? So Chris, one of the things I wanted to talk about, because of your experience in the 90s, is when you started doing this, I asked Jay a similar question. When you started doing this, there was no legal framework. In many ways, there was no compliance requirements for companies to have this type of work done. And in many circles, just what you did for a living, even with a contract, people at that time, if you remember in the 90s, were like, any hacking is illegal, and there was that kind of knee-jerk reaction. And I kind of want to talk about where do you see like an evolution of what you were doing back then versus what you do now? I know it's monstrous, but any kind of stories and things that kind of formulated the way that you do things at Lares Security now, and kind of help shape the rest of us in getting better at what we do.
Sure. I think, there's a bunch of different aspects to it to kind of consider. One of them is that, like you said, early on, it was almost so taboo that you didn't really talk about it. It afforded us some opportunities to actually do things that are now kind of harder to do today because there's so many eyes on it, there's more awareness. But it also kind of provided the same other complexities for us. I think one of the biggest areas that we found where we were able to kind of operate well back then was because no one was really aware of that. The stigma, I don't think, was maybe even as present as today of the, hacking equals bad or hacking equals criminal or something. It was just like, hacking, what's that? And as weird as that seems, over the last 10 years, it's become a really, really hard stigma that the news and all these other releases have created, that the types of testing and things that we were doing are almost always and unilaterally kind of seen as nefarious. So you have to do a whole lot more explaining now, and a lot more positioning, and a lot more display of your intent of what you're doing. I think as those types of areas started to increase, as people started to get past that kind of one-arm pen testing, run Nessus, hope that it's good enough to get a check, and started to get into a little bit more adversarial exercise, started to see that there was a way to make offense and defense kind of work together to get better, kind of like a good sparring partner. More and more were we kind of coming up against, directed controls where either the scope or the areas that we were able to attack, the venues we were able to attack, started to get smaller, which then made us go, okay, well, let's blend over into this social space, because there's a whole lot of vulnerability there that we need to explore, because it ends up getting us the same goal. And also goes with the physical space. Let's look at where that kind of contact mechanism is between electronic and physical, and get a better idea of what are the other points of ingress egress that are going to be used, because an attacker isn't going to have this same kind of finality of a certain piece of scope or a certain timing or those things. So I think as the trade has developed from the last 20 years, we've definitely had the ability to kind of make pieces of tangential work kind of come together. So bringing that kind of social, bringing the electronic, bringing the physical together, giving people an understanding that these are all things that when the teams work together, it can be highly effective. And oftentimes these teams were never really built to work together, but in the state of security today, it's almost essential that facilities and IT and even HR and training are all kind of in lockstep, so that we can make the most effect possible.
So I've got a question for you, kind of tying all those things together. One of the main concerns that I have, and a question for both of you, is whenever we look at traditional penetration testing, often physical is off the table. Social engineering is kind of coming onto the table a little bit more, but I almost feel like that standard scan the IP, try to break in, do spear phishing is more acceptable because it's easier to do, it's easier to define the scope, and in a lot of ways that's getting harder. I've talked with you guys about how a lot of our customers that come back again and again are difficult customers. One of the most terrifying things is if we have a customer that's gone through one of your firms, like, yeah, we worked with them for 3 years, we're now going to try you. It's like, God damn it, this is going to be hard.
We feel the same way.
Yeah, you're seeing it on the IP range side, but physical, it seems in a lot of ways physical security is not improving because it's often not tested and even looked at. So I wanted to get your
it's not only not, it's not tested because, frankly, there's a cost factor involved, right? Getting a company's labor for a week of remote testing doesn't involve flights and travel and lodging, and on-site hours are often more expensive than remote hours. But there's also a real cost of upgrade. Companies that'll say, oh, wow, our systems weren't patched. All right, I guess we really need to have a patch regimen. Yes, you're probably paying some labor to oversee that, but you're not, the ones and zeros are free. The idea of changing all of your card readers. Oh my God. Chris, how many times have we known clients that, we'll tell them they're like, we finally got off procs. We're using iClass. We're like, iClass Elite or CIOS? They're like, no. They're like, we're just throwing money in a hole. Like, we're time to replace 10,000 readers, 10,000 readers. So there's real cost involved. And physical is a world where it feels like not real, and it's way easier because it's not in the news every day. In the news every day is data breach, this and that. Not in the news every day is somebody broke in and stole IP out of a safe. So it's way easier for clients to say like, oh God, no, that could never happen. I think that's part of it.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think one of the other things is that when thinking about protection, just in general, no matter what kind of way you're going to protect something, physical, logical, social, whatever. There's like a finite amount of money, and you take the finite amount of money and you apply the OSI model, and then you move that money around. And right now, everybody's making all these apps and APIs and everything. So all this money's up here. So there's no money down here for physical stuff. And people go, oh, well, the door's locked, it's fine. And realize that there's an evolution across that stack continually. So we're starting to see more and more of this stuff kind of go untreated, because we have that sort of finite amount of capital that we can apply to the idea of protection.
There's a worse sunk cost problem too. If somebody invests in a different software solution, it probably cost X, and the friction involved with upgrading it was there, but it wasn't as big. Versus if we, if someone says, all right, we're going to upgrade our locks, it's almost like that person. It's like the Homer Simpson buying a computer. He's like, and this is going to be the best computer ever. It's never going to be obsolete, right? If someone's going to upgrade their badge system and their card readers and everything, and then once we do this, because there's going to be noise and there's going to be dust and drilling, we'll never have to do it again, right? Please say yes is the answer, please. And if the yes is not the answer, which newsflash, it's not, there's that reticence of well, if we're just going to be throwing money away later, we'll just throw it away very later and not now.
Yeah. Sorry, John, you were going to say something. I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, I think that was a great point. Now, I really want to touch on an issue. I don't want to say it's going to get us in trouble. Once again, the fact that the sheriff showed up and was willing to talk to people. And I don't know if you guys heard, I asked how he wanted me to introduce him, and he goes, that's fine. Go ahead and tell everybody that I'm the enemy. So he had a really good sense of humor about the whole thing.
Right.
And that was great. And his point was, we're going to pursue this, and he doesn't want anything to happen to the testers, but in a lot of ways it's kind of now out of his hand. So all of that said, when we're looking at this on social media, and we suffer from this problem as well, I've talked to both of you about this. The thing that's been very concerning to me is in social media, we have had a whole bunch of people that have very strong, definitive opinions, and yet I don't think all the information has been out yet. Right. If we're looking at this engagement, the way I first heard about it, it was completely different than the Ars Technica article and the 30-page document released from the state. And it seems, I'm just kind of throwing this out, it seems like we jump to conclusions with imperfect information and we take sides. And I wanted to talk a little bit about that. I know, Chris, you had some early on very strong opinions about coal fire. There's been a lot of people that have had strong opinions about law enforcement here, and it feels like we've gotten into this zero-sum game that either coal fire is wrong, or the sheriff is wrong, or the prosecutor's wrong. Someone's got to be wrong.
Yeah.
And I think, Deviant, you talked about it. You said no matter what's going to happen here, we're going to get better, and that's kind of the goal of us doing this conference. So I want to talk. I want you to speak a little bit on kind of us jumping to conclusions without perfect information, and maybe setting back a little bit. And how do we actually progress from this in such a way that it doesn't turn into some type of war between different groups?
Yeah, I mean, the quintessential piece of that is, I don't know how many of you have seen, there's a recent comic from the Oatmeal that's talking about perception, right? And the difference between saying that, George Washington had wooden teeth and had donkey teeth and had all of these other types of teeth, and then reframing the same topic, and he also had another set of teeth that was made of slave teeth. And looking at the two of those, and depending on how you start that or which piece of data that you share, there's some assumptions made about George Washington that may not be true in any way, shape, or form, but you're viscerally impacted by it. And I think in this situation, at least myself, and taking a temperature of where I'm at, is that the things that concern me about this situation are more of the pieces of safety that exist across how the industry instruments doing these types of engagements. Dave made some really great points that they seem very, very reasonable and very obvious once they become obvious. But until then, they're completely foreign to people. Taking into account the understanding that there are agendas when people do testing. Any of you who've done electronic testing, if you've done social engineering, you've done whatever else, there are agendas, and it's our job kind of in this lemon market of asymmetric information as practitioners to kind of go, let me pick at that for a second and try and identify, is this going to put me as the therapist in the middle of the divorcing couple? I don't want to be that, right? Like that's not my job. I'm trying to create a set of data in order for you to make better decisions with. I'm not going to make the decision for you. I'm there to create the data set. And in this entirety, we're looking at these things, and John, I love it when you say, somebody has to be wrong. I personally believe that inside of this, in this asymmetric data field, it's really on the practitioners, it's on the owners of the organizations to educate the customer of those potential pitfalls, because there isn't a good standard. We haven't all gotten together and taken over yet another room to put in 500 hours worth of work to write down the red teaming standard, to institutionalize the knowledge that we have in our head from doing thousands of these and dump it down to paper so that someone who is new to the field being tasked with this can go through and go, hey, did you ask them if they're beefing with somebody? Did you ask them if the city versus the state versus the owner versus the, as Steve was saying, the building owner, the real estate people, are all of these people in lockstep? Are we trying to put egg on somebody else's face, and now I'm in the middle of the divorced couple again? And it really is on us as a field to educate the end user and educate the consumer and call some of those things out.
Mm-hmm. And I also wanted to kind of, before Dave answers, I want to basically point out one of the things that I've talked with both of you about is doing conferences, being out at presentations, doing this in the community all the time. I think that we're very lucky in the fact that most of our customers are friends, former students, they've seen us, they have an idea of what they're getting. They have a very good idea of what they're getting. Other firms may not have that type of communication and that relationship and that rapport with their customers. Yeah. So Deviant, your take on this too.
Well, I want to briefly circle back to one thing you said, John, and I'm thrilled. Both the fact that this event happened, it happened with such a short runway, and you got all these people together, and they're in a room, and you're getting participation from the community. That is, John Strand is on a very short list of people who could have ever made that happen. It's like kind of hitting a dart from space, like on a dartboard. So that speaks volumes about you.
Even and the idea that Jason and Marita, like that takes a team, right? So absolutely. So go ahead. Sorry.
The participation from the sheriff is very inspiring. The idea of like showing up at all, that shows that there's good, clearly we're communicating goodwill. We're projecting goodwill. I will very briefly and diplomatically, I will say that statement, and I'm hoping that you're quoting his words correctly, where he said, well, I don't want to see anything happen to the pen testers. My friend Maggie in Seattle, she does a lot of activism, and she says like the ACLU can tweet like, well, we care about X. And she's like, well, did you show up in court? Like, did you file an amicus brief? Like, anyone can tweet. So I will ask, did the sheriff put a letter on his county letterhead with his signature to the DA that says, please drop all charges, this was wrong? And if that didn't happen, anybody can tweet.
Yeah.
That's not as undiplomatic as I'm going to get there.
Yeah, and I think that kind of goes back to what I said. We tend to have opinions without full information. So go ahead. Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
I understand that, but criminal records follow people, and criminal records are not to be trifled with. And in our industry, like that's a thing. Like let alone how many of us like the pew pew life. Like criminal records are real and not to be effed around with. So commit or actually commit to saying no, they shouldn't have a criminal record. Everything else that Chris said, though, I'm completely in alignment with, and I loved the analogy of the therapist who says, they've seen how many couples come in, and a young therapist might not catch it, but let's go even one, and angry couples, one thing. What about like a teenager, a teenager who claims that they're being either abused or bullied, like the very veteran therapist can read between the lines and say, what are the other forces in play and whose voice is not, the question is whose voice is not in the room. And it takes a lot of experience to speak for the voice who's not in the room. And it takes a lot of work. Like, you can see the sighs and the eye rolls in the other conference members, like when you bring up that voice. And maybe they were excluded from the room for a reason. But finding their voice and making sure they're represented, even for a second, matters.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd agree.
Cool. And now let's talk a little bit about that. I think you touched on something that I want to discuss. If we're talking about the voices that are not in the room.
Hey, John.
Yeah.
John, your microphone went bad.
Are we back?
Batteries,
no.
maybe.
Hello.
I'm gonna mute
yeah.
you and then.
All right.
Any better?
Can you guys hear me?
It just turned into staticky robot.
Yeah.
All right, so hold on.
Yeah, either somebody is torrenting the new
about
Mandalorian
Can
or
you guys
something.
hear me now?
Yeah, it's great.
Yes,
Okay.
perfect.
It's a different mic.
They stopped.
Okay.
That's why we have backups to backups. So let's talk about the voice that is not in the room. Coldfire did not show up. I did not expect them to. As I mentioned at the onset, even if Coldfire, if somebody had contacted me and said, "Hey, we want to show up," I'd be like, "You might want to think that through," just because there's an ongoing legal case. But let's talk about the two testers. Because I think that this is important, because that's a voice that is not in the room. And I really want to kind of drive home something that Deviant started talking about. So the question I'm going to ask you, and I know what the answer is, if this is dropped down to a misdemeanor, right, and it's just misdemeanor trespass, is that something that can impact the career of these two testers? Now I can't hear Deviant.
Like, super yes.
And let's talk about, no, I can hear you. Let's talk about why and how, just a little bit.
Yes. Very much
Yeah.
yes. I'm signing yes.
Okay, so we've got you. We can hear you, Dave. So
Can you hear me?
let's talk about, yeah, we can hear you. We can hear you. Let's talk about the validation that our customers do many times for us before we even allowed to test. Because I don't think that a lot of people know the background investigations, the sometimes clearances that we have to have, and somebody just a simple background check. So what is it a typical customer does? I'll start with Chris. That a customer does to validate the people that you put on site in some situations?
So typical background checks exist for just about everything that we do. I would say then as you start to go up the criteria level, moving from enhanced background checks to criminal checks, all the way through credit checks, because I'm sure you've gone through the same, both of you, where you're working with a lot of money. Somebody wants to make sure that the engineers that are involved in that are not in type of financial distress or harm that puts them more viable into creating a scenario or some type of loss. And then as you start to get to other business entities, whether they're state or federal entities, whether they're agencies themselves, or certain companies that treat themselves like agencies, you start to get into things like CJIS, you start to get into compartmental clearances, and as those things come up in your record, everything from what could be I'll take this situation as a DUI that got pleaded down to a misdemeanor, it still starts to show up on your CJS and gives them reasonable ability to revoke it, especially when it's in the context of some type of crimes associated with the profession, which is where it starts to get to a real slippery slope.
Yeah.
So I'll give you an example. I want to give a quick, concrete example of that. So back whenever I was in college, I've told this story a number of times. My wife and I, we were actually busted smoking pot together in the dorms. This is 20 years ago, folks. And I remember I told at Accenture, or Anderson Consulting, when I first joined them, I thought that was going to be the end of me being able to work for them. I was honest about it and upfront. They were cool with it. Right. Then I got offered a job at Northrop Grumman, and I thought, there's no way I'm going to get a clearance. None whatsoever. I'm going to be able to get a clearance because I have this prior conviction. And Northrop Grumman, no, we're not a problem. I got full TSSCI, SAP SAR programs, so the highest level of clearance in certain areas that you can get, and that wasn't an issue. We got onto one engagement. They did a background investigation. This was like 5 years ago on me. And they found that 15 years ago. And they're like, well, we don't know how we feel about John Strand being on this assessment. So those things are sticky. They will stick with you for a long, long time. So go ahead, Dean.
Yeah, so the same thing, exactly. If someone has, there's context to everything, right? And you nailed it in terms of if someone's misdemeanor conviction or even felony conviction is something not germane to the job, that's, if you're, I don't know, let's think of something really vicious that we hate. If someone has a felony conviction for dog fighting, they might say like, well, I was a misguided youth, and the client might, yeah, it's misguided, it's awful, but it's not germane to dealing with my health records. Maybe they might still hire you. But if something, it's the same reason, and there's going to be a lot of nodding heads watching the stream, or even some of us, like a lot of us did some proto-urban exploring when we were young. We'd get into places we weren't supposed to get. We get on roofs at hacker cons. The moment, and I credit my friend Bobek, who's my partner at Core and also at Tool, the open organization of lockpickers. Like when Bobek and I were on the board of Tool, he looked at me one day because we were at a con and a bunch of people were going up to the roof. He's like, it sucks, we can't do that anymore. And I was like, really? They're rolling like, I think there was a keg up there. He's like, no, dude, we're on the board of a nonprofit like that does this. We are all about ethical lockpicking. Like we can never go up on the roof again. Like that's not up for us. And because it's germane to that territory, like you have to stay really serious about it. So whenever there is a reason that a client might think, or someone who checks on you might think that you can't be trusted with the thing you're supposed to do for them, that's got long trail ramifications, much more than, as you say, like someone might have had a DUI that they pled down or something.
Yeah.
All right. Oh, go ahead, Chris.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think given the idiosyncrasies of what's going on here, the part that I will happily get out in order to soothe my own soul is that both Deviant and I own businesses. And if this was one of our jobs and it was one of our teammates, my focus would not be on pleading to the public to have sympathy for my company, or pleading to the people of the industry to demonize and meme and show our worst to someone who's doing police work. My focus would be on how do I protect my people and what changes do I need to make in my company in order for that to never happen again. And so I would like to outwardly and very vocally and clearly say that the response from Coalfire and the executive team at Coalfire was disgusting at best. There is absolutely no reason that they should have been pandering to the public, and they should have spent every ounce of their time and media presence and money protecting their people, not asking for the community to come to their side.
And I also want to be very clear. If you're at Coalfire and you're like, well, Chris is picking on us, I've had Chris pick up the phone and call me whenever I've been out of line in presentations and basically told me, like, hey, you need to kind of amend your ways. I'm not going to go into details on exactly how that happened, but that's important that we kind of keep each other in check in this industry. So there is an importance there. So go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, and I'm absolutely not picking. This has nothing to do with competition or anything else. This has to do with me feeling a sense of ownership of creating this service in the industry, just as Deviant did, just as other members of the community were doing this stuff far before the sales and marketing people got into it because they wanted to show a new stream of revenue for the company. Coalfire started in 2001. I had hundreds under my belt by then. And until their marketing people picked it up, right? And I'm not saying anything about the quality of the engineering or anything else. It's truly about the diligence of when you own a company. And I think all three of us can really see that, and it affects us directly. But when you own a company, it's really on you to protect the engineers. It's really on you to protect the employees of the company. And all of those things end up coming with the typical finger point, where one of the fingers of blame points at the other person and three of them point at yourself. And I think that needs to really be understood here, and we need to look at how do we as owners, how do we as curators of the craft, how do we own these types of things? Because this is a situation that I truly believe was avoidable. And anything that was avoidable now goes back to the responsibility of why didn't my process create that avoidance?
Well, and one of the things I do want to call out for Coalfire, because I agree with you on kind of the marketing side. And as I mentioned earlier, people are like, this is kind of a marketing thing, even though I retort, like, I'm literally bringing all of my competitors onto a series of webcasts with me. But one of the things I give props for Coalfire was they very quickly posted bail, and it was not cheap to get these guys out. So I think that there's some things that they did absolutely correct. And I think that there's some things that the rest of the firms need to sit down and say, okay, let's say our testers are now in prison. Can we pull out $100,000 out of thin air to get these people out immediately? And I think a lot of firms need to be asking that question. They need to make sure that they have that capability. And that's one thing that I think I learned from Coalfire, and that what they did right in this situation. I agree with all of your points, Chris, but we got to give them props where it's due. They could have just let those guys languish in prison or had to post bail on their own. By the way, ironically enough, there's a bail place directly across the street from the courthouse. I thought that was just so cool. I should take that picture and get it. Yep.
Speaking as someone who has pulled 5 figures out of a bank with my wife to post bail for people, like, it's a whole mess. And the idea of doing it remotely, I presume they did, unless they flew someone into town. That's, again, I will respect where respect is due. I find Chris's statement about the social media approach to be, there is a validity there, but I will also contextualize it that we live like right on the cusp of a post-truth society in the age of Trump, and tweets matter more than testimony in court. And like, I want to believe it was more about the way narrative is controlled today. I don't have to be happy that that's how it works, but I want to believe that. I want to believe it wasn't just marketing, but getting your message out, because nobody can pay attention to anything, because the world's a dumpster fire and everybody's mind is gone. And if they hadn't said something, these guys would have just been forgotten. Other than without the public pressure, maybe their case would have gone a different way. I don't know. Oh my God. I hate the fact that nowadays lawyers still want to squash people and say never talk, but if you don't talk, everyone else is talking for you, and it gets worse and worse.
Absolutely. All right, so final thoughts, gentlemen, before we wrap this up. We've already gone over, but I really appreciate you guys taking time out of your schedules for this weird thing that was Awareness Con. So I greatly appreciate it. So any final comments for the audience, both online and the people local?
Myself, I think if you're doing this type of testing, and whether all of us have been in a situation where a salesperson has sold something that we do or don't do because the check was there. But look, if you're in a situation where you're doing this type of testing, you have some concerns about this. I don't care what time of night it is. You could tweet me, email me, whatever. I would rather know that I can help you answer some questions, or at least start to ask the right questions that might put the brakes on the project for a little bit, or have a 5-minute chat of what are some of the pro tips that you kind of just have to look out for. reach out to the community. I think there's a lot of people that are willing to help, and the community, especially on this type of testing, different than pen testing, different than AppSec and everything else. We sort of had to band together because at the end of the day, when we first started doing this stuff, I only had other members who did red teaming who could bail me out because I probably even couldn't myself. So if I called Dave in the middle of the night on one of these gigs, he would be the only one that would understand what I was even talking about. Not even my mother would just be like, you broke into a building, you deserve to go to jail. And so, we're still at the infancy of this type of thing. So don't limit your exposure to the community resource, even if it's something in private or, we got to sign the special don't talk about it ticket or whatever. Just reach out, because I want you to be safe. I want this type of testing to continue. I want it to grow. I want the impact of it to be felt and understood. But at the end of the day, if the testers aren't safe, if the contract isn't safe, if the environment isn't safe, or if you're the consumer, you don't know how to get somebody to do it safely, reach out. There's a bunch of resources that just aren't written down yet because we're out breaking into shit.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
All right.
Both of the other people on this stream right now are people I count among some of the worst days I've ever had, and I've called both of you, not always about the industry, like, oh my God, what's going on with this relationship I'm having? I've never had a bad day where I've spoken to either of you, then it hasn't become better. So yeah, John's not just blowing smoke on Chris.
Yeah.
They reach out. There should never be stigma from anything. We talk about this with mental health, right? But there should never be stigma about asking for help. It always is the better decision if you're worried about something.
Yeah.
And so sorry?
I was going to say, and also we talk about reaching out, and that can be direct messages. A lot of our phones are available on websites. We get calls from people. I once had a pen tester call me up. He's like, my boss is telling me to run a full Nessa scan on an entire IP range of a hospital. And I'm like, yeah, don't do that. And he's like, but she to the whole harmless and indemnification clauses and said the hospital can't sue us. I'm like, no, you will go to jail if you do that. We are available, and that's just comes with the nature of what we do.
Yeah. And even if they won't go to jail, I like the whole theme of what my little presentation could probably be summed up as, you might be okay on paper, like intellectually and legally you're okay, but are you okay? And are other people thinking, are they emotionally okay with you?
Yeah.
Our third partner in core, Robert, during his sessions, he's talking about the push-pull of a lot of factors, and he says the sad reality with a lot of physical security is nothing opens wallets like a critical incident. I would say there's now a corollary, nothing opens minds like a critical incident. A lot of things, and all of you have hit on this before earlier today, right? Sometimes takes a critical incident for us to all look at ourselves and go, wow, we didn't consider this. So this is the right response to it. Bringing everyone together, talking about it, and trying to flesh out those dark crevices and corners where we haven't, just because the light hasn't landed on that corner, it doesn't mean it's not there. And think about it before it happens.
All right, I'm going to let that be the last word. Everybody, I want to say thank you very much for Chris and Deviant for showing up. Great way to end it out. I also want to shoot out a big thank you to the city of Adel, which is weird because I very rarely have a city that's kind of supported this, from the library to the bed and breakfast. They made everyone sandwiches and muffins. They were up baking those things like last night. And then also the amazing staff, Velda and Jason and Marita. We just had Deb also. We just had an amazing amount of people that were able to pull this thing together simply because I made one crazed phone call in the rain in Boston about making this happen. And also the people that showed up. We had a good turnout from the community, local SEC DSM. I think we're going out drinking after this, right? Is that a thing? Okay.
I see Tom thumbs upping right there. Right on.
Yeah. So once again, thanks everybody for making this happen. Also, a big thank you for the sheriff for showing up and just at least saying hi. That took amazing amounts of guts to come here. Whether you agree or disagree, that's still impressive. And with that, let's close it out.
John,
oh yeah, go ahead, Chris.
I touched on it quick, but any ownership that we can have inside of this for all participants and everybody involved, please just try and be the best person that you can. I know people have a lot of polarizing views around this and they want to say a lot of stuff. But even, when I saw stuff on the sheriff, I thought to myself of some things that happened to my wife and I, and stalking and terrible things that happen online. And I think it's time for us as an industry to really show our best side. What you did, what your team did, I think is phenomenal. And I think we need to try and keep that up, keep that mentality up, right? Let's not worry about memes and everything else. Let's talk about the problem. Let's fix some stuff together because we have a whole lot of great minds. So just be good people.
And with that, I think that's the last word. All right, thank you, everybody. Talk to you all later.
Thank you all.
All right, this time I'm ending the webinar for real. So, all right, thanks again.
Bye-bye.